Alright, good afternoon. My name is Bill and I'm a representative of the North Idaho Way. The North Idaho Way is a group that wants to create basically harmony across all points of view. Doesn't mean that there should be compromise in our conservative values and what's best for the state of Idaho and the constituents of Idaho. But we are certainly open to hearing people and discussing, and we want to do that in a friendly, positive way. Right? You can't solve problems. You're not willing to talk to people who disagree with you and hear them. All right. That said, we have Representative St. Dixon here and Senator Jim Woodward who will be speaking in just a moment. But we'll go ahead and open with the Pledge of Allegiance and then the prayer. Okay? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Lord, Father God, I just pray that you come to this meeting and your Spirit dwells here to create harmony and love for one another and show us the way to correctly solve the problems that we have. In your name, amen.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Well, the good senator started us off in Bonner's Ferry, so it's my turn. I barely made it with Bonner's Ferry. So I was a little bit late in doing that. But thank you all for showing up today. Pleasure to see everybody. There's some new faces, which is always nice, rather than our same old group. But last month when I was here, I was telling you how it was kind of slow, that the legislature did not start it off as quickly as we normally do, and a lot of that, I think, was due to the redistricting and this being an election year and people being unsure of where they were going to be or if they had to face off against friends come the election, and so that slowed things down a little bit. But since then, we've caught up and probably exceeded what we would normally be doing at this point. There's been long days where we've been on the floor for 3 hours in the morning and then 3 hours in the evening. And we caught up a couple weeks ago, but now we're back to the point where we've got about 30 bills to vote on, 30 to 40 bills to vote on every day. And those days are going to be stretching out again, which make it difficult. We haven't even seen a lot of Senate bills yet. Our transmittal date, which is the date when all the House bills are supposed to be in the Senate, and all the Senate bills are supposed to be in the House, is Monday. And so everybody is in a big rush, or they were last week, to get their bills printed and then to the floor as quickly as possible in doing that. And that's why there's a huge glut of bills, and STEM's still coming. It's not a hard and fast date, but we try and keep to that date to manage the workflow and get out of there in 85 to 90 days in doing that. So things are backed up quite a bit, but we'll be working through it next week, and committees are still doing their work, but some of the afternoon committees will be slowing down. Business probably doesn't have a lot more to do. Transportation will be slowing down, and those will start to see less work, but the morning committees are still going to be pretty busy in doing that. One of the interesting things that happened during the past month and just a couple weeks ago is that our neighbors to the west decided to place a tax on all fuel traveling through their state that would directly affect Idaho and other states to the west or to the east. So that would be a 6% tax that Washington was proposing to impose upon Idaho and other states surrounding it because of their refineries and the fuel that comes in there from other refineries as it travels through. So we got wind of that, of course, as it was being proposed in Washington, and we quickly passed a resolution off the House floor and a resolution that the Senate passed as well, so it could go into their committee when they had the hearings over there in Washington. There was a senator that was friendly to Idaho that was going to speak in the committee about our opposition to it and citing basic constitutional law, that this directly is what the Commerce Clause was put into the Constitution for. This states weren't competing against one another as far as installing tariffs and things that were coming across in that sense. So thankfully, the gentleman that was I just got stuck. No, sponsoring, that's the word. I was going to say promoting, but the sponsor of that bill in the Senate in Washington got that letter, and they've pulled it back at this point. It was something the governor was pushing, though, so I don't know if it'll try and come back. But thankfully, the actions we took as a legislature in defending our right as a state and in upholding our constitutional law caused them to put a pause on that. Hopefully, they've pulled it off totally. Hopefully, it's not just a pause. And then in our Revenue and Taxation Committee, we learned that Oregon is doing something similar to our corporations in Idaho that are conducting business in Oregon. They're imposing a corporate tax just for doing business over there, more than you would normally tax. So it's another tax that would supersede things, that would disrupt the Commerce Clause, and so we're pushing back on that now as well. Just passed some legislation out of the Revenue and Taxation Committee to do that. So it's interesting to see what those states that have a problem spending are doing to try and garner some more revenue at the expense of our state and other states to the west of them. Transportation and Defense Committee, we heard House Bill 475, and that was part of the governor's red tape reduction efforts. And what it did was remove a prohibition on people gathering and displaying arms against armed groups, non-regulated militias essentially, in doing that. And that regulation was removed by the National Guard. They saw this as language that didn't need to be there anymore. They were concerned that it butted up against our First and Second Amendment, which it surely does, but it caused a lot of concern. A lot of people thought it a great idea, didn't even know there was this prohibition. Other people were very concerned about roving bands of armed men carousing through the streets and causing trouble. It was instituted about 100 years ago when Governor Steunenberg was murdered by the mining revolts and riots that were going on, and there was a contract put out on him, and men were roving around and trying to do things at that point. So this prohibition was put in there, but as the National Guard was going through what the governor has termed zero-based regulation to go through and remove as many rules as possible, they saw this as duplicative. So there is still rules in place to protect against bad actors in that sense, but this was removing that prohibition against basic constitutional rights in that sense. But I still get emails about that, but that's just an interesting thing that we got to vote on. It'll be going over to our good friends in the Senate soon, and they can talk about it now it got out of the House. One large piece of legislation that just came through yesterday through the Revenue and Taxation Committee, and it was just a print hearing, so the idea got out and we voted to print it. So it has a bill number now, it's House Bill 741, but it's a paradigm shift in tax policy within the state of Idaho. And what it's basically going to do is remove property taxes from every owner-occupied parcel 5 acres and below in doing that. But in order to make up our good friends in local government, to make up the money that they're going to lose on that, it would institute a 1.85% increase in sales tax. This is what the proposition does. In addition with that, you're going to, people who are not homeowners, or everybody, would then get a $175 grocery tax credit. That would be raised another $75 to be $175, and that should basically hit everybody's food budget in a sense. It would be hard for somebody to go over that. That's per person in a household in doing that. So in order to help or benefit the people that don't own homes and get a tax break also, we're going to be, the proposition is to increase the grocery tax credit to $175. This also has a provision in there that if there's an excess of revenue that they receive, that they will use 10% of that excess to mitigate other property taxes, be it commercial, agricultural, and timber. That's part of that going forward. And then the final piece of that is that it will be put out to an approval vote, basically, of the citizens of Idaho. So if we pass this, it will then go to an approval vote that people can say whether they like this or not. That's very similar to what we did in '06 when we removed the M&O levy off your property taxes, and then went out to the people and got the approval to keep that the way it was there. So just to make sure that this is something they want to do. There's a lot of discussion. This print hearing went on for a little bit because there's a lot of questions about how this will affect everybody. I think the local entities will be pretty concerned about how this will affect them. They've been brought into that conversation already, but I expect a lengthy hearing when we have the full hearing on that bill. One of my concerns was why that limitation on 5 acres. A lot of folks in Bonner County and Boundary County have more acreage of that, but the way that they are doing that homeowner's assessment now, it says 1 acre, but most counties are going up to 5 acres when they're doing that. So in order to make sure that their revenues were remaining neutral for them, they had to expand that to 5 acres in doing that. So if you had a 10-acre parcel, 5 acres would not be taxed, but the remaining 5 would in that sense. And if you think of folks with 40 acres that are farming it and things like that, that had to be done because that could still be a primary residence in doing that. But there's a lot that we heard this morning, a lot of concern and things when we told some folks in Bonner's Ferry about this, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I'm excited about it. I think it upholds a basic principle that our founders were trying to install as far as owning your own property and being self-determining and providing for your family and yourself in doing that. But the flip side of that is the way we've done taxes for many years now. We have to make sure the counties are kept whole, and this isn't something that goes in a negative direction the way adding that extra percent on sales tax did in '06, where it doesn't directly go to schools now. Wise legislators before us took that away and used it for general fund things sometimes. But it'll be something to watch, and it's kind of just a huge shift that may settle in doing that. The Federalism Committee, took 2 RFPs. We put out an RFP for proposals to quantify the federal land within Idaho, to see what dollars we're losing in PILT money, the money that's given to Idaho because we're not able to use the federal lands the way we should be able to tax them and use that in that sense. So we went over that. We had 2 responses. One was from a Utah company, one was from a company here in Sandpoint, and we heard what those proposals were. The company from Utah was proposing just to look at Canyon County and portions of Canyon County that had federal land in it, because that's similar to what they did in Utah. And then the company in Sandpoint was going to look at the 5 northern counties. We thought both needed to be done, essentially. We need to look at BLM land and how that's valued, because the southern part of the state is mainly BLM land, but up here we have timberland, and that's a different assessment in how it's used in doing that. So next week, I believe next Wednesday, we'll be deciding on which company to go with, but we're going to require that there's some timberland in there as well as BLM land to do that, and try and get an idea of what dollars are not coming into the state that our counties should be getting, and locals, because and it would help the schools as well in doing that. It's just a tool. It's not something that will be definitive, but it will give our federal delegation something to talk about when they go back and try and secure the SRS funds and maybe get an increase in these PILT funds. Utah's doing it. I think Wyoming's looking at it. So most western states where a majority of the federal land is held is trying to get these valuations so we have a stronger argument to the federal government as far as funding that correctly and the way that should go. I talked this morning about some work the good senator and I are doing on roads again. I mean, we're able to get some work done at Lakeshore 95, but there's a bit of a congested area in Naples also by the mill, and that mill's expanding. And so we're getting all the parties together to look at that and try and help fix that at this point. It looks like it's going in a positive direction as well. That's not necessarily pertinent to us here, but it's just some of the work that we do on behalf of constituents and trying to make things better and easier for us when we can have that influence, and we do. And I will leave it at that and let the good senator go.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Considering where we are, I'll start off with the piece that I didn't talk about this morning, but we passed a piece of legislation through the House and Senate. It will be signed this Tuesday by the governor in regards to armed forces and peace officer scholarships in Idaho. In Idaho, we have existing code that says if a spouse or dependent of any service member or peace officer who dies in combat or in the line of duty, all those spouses and dependents are offered a free education here in Idaho. That's tuition, room and board, books, and that's been the case for quite some time. Unfortunately, last year we had an accident near Boise out of the Air National Guard, and we lost 3 members last year. 40-year-old, 41-year-old, those guys right in that age range with young kids and spouses. And that was not in combat, that was in training. But why do you train? You train for combat. And fortunately, a member of a prior Coast Guard member, Representative Chris Mathias, had had asked the question, will these kids be eligible for this scholarship, Armed Forces Scholarship? And the unfortunate answer was no. And so we took care of that. So we run that through both bodies. Representative Mathias sponsored that in the House, and I sponsored it in the Senate. And so those families that gave those 3 men to our country, all of those children, those spouses are eligible for that. So considering we're in the VFW hall, I wanted to make sure everybody heard that and we honor those people. I serve on the, shifting gears now, I serve in the Senate, and I serve on 3 different committees: the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee, the Transportation Committee, and the Education Committee. And education is one of the major roles of state government, and so between the Joint Finance Committee and education being a big part of the budget, I spend a lot of time on budget. So you're going to hear, I typically come in here and talk numbers, and I hope I don't lose you with numbers, but I'll talk about what I think is the great pieces coming out of some of the efforts this year. Coming into this year, we've all heard and known how much revenue has been collected in the state in taxes. At the state level, we set income tax at a certain rate, we set sales tax at a certain rate, and then depending on the level of economic activity, different levels of revenue come in. We ended up this year with a $1.9 billion more tax revenue than we would expect, based on what was projected from a year ago, a 24% increase in tax revenues. So on a $10 billion budget, an extra almost $2 billion, it's pretty significant. And the budgeting process starts with the agencies requesting, and then the governor's office coming up with a recommended budget. The executive branch recommends a budget, and the legislature gets the say in that through the finance and appropriations process. And all of these pass through as bills, so both the governor signs off and the House and Senate sign off on the expenditures for the state. But the governor's approach, which I agree with, to utilize that $1.9 billion is what I call the Idaho balanced approach. And the recommendation that's come in front of us and that we're implementing right now is looking at all parts of this Idaho economy and what the roles of state government are, and taking into consideration the taxpayer. So with that extra tax money that's coming, one, we have already passed, and it's been signed into law, a tax change this year, which is a pretty significant tax decrease in income tax. So right now, Idaho income tax is 6.5%. It's only been just a little time, not that many years ago, 5 or 8, 10 years ago, that we were at 7.4% income tax. So we've done a number of tax cuts on income tax. We're down to income tax on Idaho will be 6%, which is the same as what we have on the sales tax. So those two numbers will be matched now. But a tax break in that manner, which is an ongoing reduction in what we all pay in taxes here as in our contribution to the state and the activities of the state. The other portion of that tax bill is a one-time piece, so making that distinction between what affects budgets clear into the future and what affects the budget this year. And that one-time piece is a tax refund on your 2020 taxes. So if you go and look at what you paid in 2020, you're going to get a check back for 12% of that amount, and that's coming up. Now that has one little caveat to that is that if you paid less than $75, you'll get $75. And just an acknowledgement that we're not going to mail out checks for spend $10 to mail a check for $3. And so that's the tax cut. That's part one of this whole $1.9 billion picture is a tax cut. Where is that extra money coming from? I said that's income tax and sales tax. And so we've seen a large amount of money flow into the state from the federal government. In 2000, or a year ago, that was $8 billion at the beginning of the pandemic. It came in that first year, $8 billion and $5 billion the next. But just to give you a sense of scale, the Idaho economy, 2 years ago, this is a little bit older number, but 2 years ago, the Idaho economy was $82 billion, the gross state product. At the national level, we call it the gross domestic product, but at the state level, gross state product. $82 billion, and we injected an extra $8 billion, so 10% more. You can see how that would, then all that provides, that makes a lot of things happen in the state, and then those show up in the state coffers as sales tax and income tax. So that's where a lot of this money came from. Now keeping that in mind then, we know that federal money is coming right out of our national debt, or is contributing to national debt. The national debt's gone from $22 billion just a few years ago to $30 billion. Trillion. I knew there was a comma. We could take care of $30 billion. We've gone from $22 trillion in national debt to $30 trillion in national debt. The graph that I saw that really stands out to me is if you chart the national debt versus time, you look at it over the last 100 years, and then correct it with national debt actually as a percentage of gross domestic product. Because when you say as a percentage of gross domestic product, you're taking into account that the dollar is worth a different amount. There are 3 spikes on the graph: World War I, World War II, and now. And the spike now is even higher than World War I, World War II. So we have a national debt and on a trajectory that we really don't have a lot of input on as a state. But what we can do is that money has come to us, that's a federal decision, and that money has come to the state of Idaho. How do we put that money to use wisely? And what we've done in the state of Idaho, or what we are doing right now, is making long-term investments so that the people who are paying that money back over time benefit from those investments. And some of those investments are transportation related, some of those are water and sewer district related. And so I'll talk about those a little bit, because we've just been passing those through in the budget. The Department of Environmental Quality budget we did just last week, and that has one piece of it that will continue over the next few years, but we've had another $50 million in there. And over the next few years, that's a total of around, I think, $300 million that goes to rural water and sewer districts. And this is important to us. This is Bonner County and Mallory County, rural Idaho. And these small districts have a hard time complying with some of the regulations that we put in place, either nationally or at the state level. But we say the water has to meet these requirements to be drinking water. And we say the effluent from a sewer treatment plant has to be at these levels of contaminants if we're going to put it back into the river. And those are difficult requirements oftentimes. And when you look at a small system, so we have these small rural water and sewer districts that 100 people, 200 people, you can't generate enough tax revenue, or you don't want to, hopefully you don't want to tax yourself at that level to build $1 million or $2 million or $10 million plant. So let's take some of this ARPA money that is coming to the state and make these investments in our future, and that's what we'll see. Normally, the way the state has been able to help these small districts is a revolving loan fund, and so a small district can borrow money from the state at a real low interest rate and make investments in their own areas. The money that's coming through this the process we're talking about now will be grant funds, and so small districts can apply for and make these improvements with grants. And I was talking with someone up north of Bonners Ferry. There's a little water system up there that only has about 30 members, and they had a real tough time because when they drilled for water, that they got a well that had a little bit more uranium in it than is desirable. It's above the limits, and so uranium is radioactive. And so there's a national standard on how much can be in the water. And they've had a really difficult time complying with laws. So they're going to be a prime candidate for one of these grants to take care of meeting a regulatory requirement that is really probably, it's quite onerous for a small entity like that. So we hope to see a lot of benefit out of that. That money's going through now, and that these small districts can work with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality to apply for and then go out and implement these grants. Switching over to transportation now, again, something that's really beneficial to us in the rural parts of Idaho. There's a couple different programs, but we've taken a few different chunks of money, $200 million of general fund money, and injected that an additional $200 million in the transportation department. And doing that with a 60-40 split, which is a kind of a standard we've developed over the last decade or so. So of that $200 million, 60% of that, or $120 million, will go to the Idaho Transportation Department, and that'll come out on our roads in improvements. And then the other $80 million is going out to the local entities. We have a highway distribution formula which takes into account the population and a few other factors, but the counties, the cities, and highway districts are all going to get their share of that $80 million, which they can get out and do some more maintenance projects. So $200 million over here. We have another $200 million to talk about now, which is rural bridges. I just carried the bill on the floor Friday afternoon. That was a bill for really a total of $250 million, and it has $10 million in it for pedestrian improvements across the state. And then we have the $200 million for rural bridges, which is great here. We have a lot of infrastructure that was built after post-World War II, through the 50s to the 70s in that era. The United States was growing strong, and we put a lot of money into small infrastructure around the country. Most of that infrastructure has a design life of about 50 to 70 years. And so it's coming due. You see the little bridges out, and it has a picture of a truck with 2 axles and tells you what you can haul, just like the Sand Creek Bridge that just got replaced a few years ago. It used to be limited. So if you couldn't get across that bridge with your truck, you had to drive down and around the town. It hinders the economy. So we'll get after these small bridges and make some improvements here in the state of Idaho with that money. Again, that is, we put it on the national credit card. So we know it's on the credit card. We're going to get some use out of it over decades to come, and generations. The other piece of that, in that $250 million, $18 million we're going to pay off some bonds early, the Garvey bond program, get the 2012 bonds, I think, taken care of. And a couple more pieces, some airport improvements and so on. So really exciting that we can make use of the money in a way I think that is wise. Just keeping in mind the ARPA money comes to the state. That's a federal. Those decisions have been made at the federal level. If we wanted to send that money back, we could send it there, and it wouldn't go back to the Treasury. It wouldn't go back against the national debt. It would go and be used in another state. And so that's why we made the decisions we made to utilize that money here. And then finally, education. We're passing the budgets right now. We did the higher education budget last week, which is colleges and universities. We have our 4 four-year institutions. We have 4 two-year institutions, which are all state institutions. So the University of Idaho, Boise State University, Idaho State University out of Pocatello, and then down in Lewiston, Lewis and Clark State College. And then, of course, we have 4 community colleges, the North Idaho College, and then 3 more throughout the state. And that budget went through last week. A little bit of contention around it, and it's more of a budgeting nuance, really, but it's still significant, so I'll explain it here. But we had a couple of, when we go into the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee and go to pass a budget bill, we can go in there and say, I want to do this and I want to do this. Normally what we do is iron out our differences ahead of time. We have 10 House members and 10 Senate members, and we always stay below a quorum, and we sit at lunchtime and we sit in the evenings and we iron out where we're going to be. On the higher end budget, we had a little bit of contention, so we came forward with a couple different budgets. I was just holding back on the one because it utilized some rainy day funds to help fill a hole in that budget, and I don't think it's raining right now. and so just that simple. So I just pushed back on that simply. Didn't prevail on that one, but we still put out a great budget. It'll use up a little bit of that rainy day fund, but I think the point was made, and maybe next time around we won't be looking at that. So that was $643 million into those higher education institutions, which is a significant amount of money. But the only thing I add to that is that if you look back over time, which I did last week, went back 20 years or 40 years, from the state level, we used to contribute a larger portion of the budgets of those universities. And so what we're doing right now, by not contributing as much from the state level, that forces the other revenue source for universities and colleges is the students' tuition and fees. And so if you look at a graph over time, a little bar graph, and it shows total budget for this university, it was this much state money and this much tuition and fees. And then that has shifted to where now it's about half and half. So the students are picking up, anybody who wants to go and attend, they're picking up half the cost of that university. So you say, that makes it less affordable for students. It makes it harder for an Idaho kid to go get that education, which I'll advocate for all day, that if we can go get our young members, people in Idaho educated, it'll allow them to overcome some of the hurdles that we see now, the housing costs. We compete in a national economy now, especially just significantly after the last 2 years, how easy it has become to work remotely. So we now compete for housing in Bonner County with someone who has a job in the Bay Area of California with a 6-figure income. So to compete in the world, you need to have those personal skills and tools to make yourself valuable and to be able to go out and earn that living. That's what we're after, is an Idaho independent lifestyle, and you do that by being able to take care of yourself, and that education is the key to that. So that's the higher education budget. Then coming up this week, the K-12 budget. So separate from the $640 million for those universities and colleges, we have over $3 billion in the K-12 budget this year. We have been making significant increases in that budget, and in doing so, that helps with the property tax issue. Because when we're picking up the bill for the education budget, and remember K-12 education, we spelled that out right in the Constitution, right from the get-go, that the state of Idaho, the legislature has a duty to establish a uniform, thorough, common system of free public schools. I think I almost got that word for word. Joe didn't check me. But we have that obligation to education, and so we're trying to make sure we're paying for it from the appropriate funding source, because this challenge we've seen with property taxes and the property tax system we have in place, it was really eye-opening a few years ago. I've been serving on the property tax interim committee every summer for the last couple of years. And the first year we sat down and looked at it, we looked at a graph, we looked at major shifts in property tax policy, major legislation that occurred over the last 100 years in property tax policy in the state of Idaho. And that policy changes every time the economy runs strong or the economy dies, because the system doesn't work well in the ups and downs. And so where Representative Dixon was explaining the one proposal that's come out this week, there's another piece that I've been advocating for, is just to time average your residential property values. We know that the sunny days don't always last, and so values do go up and down, although over the long term they continue to trend up. But we already average the value of timber in the state of Idaho for property taxes, and what I was told a few weeks ago was just today, if we did a 5-year average of your property value, it would take your property tax bill back about 2 or 3 years. So whatever your property tax bill was a few years ago, it would shift back to that immediately, just by saying we're going to average your home value over the past 5 years. So when we average, and now if you continue to climb, an average is going to climb with that. But when values go up and then sometimes they go down, we can clip those painful highs and lows off and get to a more of a even feel, or more sustainable or predictable tax system for us as Idaho taxpayers. So coming back off that property tax and education, and going back to that education budget, in the K-12 budget this year, the big investments and the big programs we're looking at, all the state employees are on a system of a healthcare system. It's funded from the state, and teachers and classified staff and administrators, people working in the education system, have been funded at a lower level, about $4,000 discrepancy per year. And so we're evening that up this year. So that's $105 million to get that evened up, so that healthcare for teachers is the same as healthcare for any other state employee. We're also looking at, we'll fund kindergarten in Idaho, optional kindergarten. It's not something that's going to be a state mandated program, state forced program, but you let people decide if they would like to have their child, or if their child is struggling a little bit, you want to get some more class time, it'll be an option for people that's being asked for across the state. From more than 2/3 of Idahoans respond and say that they'd like to have that as an option. So that's some more money going in there. Did I talk long enough?
Good, we all did Dixon.
That's
That's pretty good.
He's a senator, he always talks about it.
That's our, we have a couple good standing jokes, and that's one of them. He gives me a hard time for talking a lot.
Yes, all right, questions? Yes, Chandler.
What exactly is ARPA? Where does it come from? And how is it going to affect our state?
ARPA was a funding plan passed by Congress, American Recovery and Protection Act.
American Rescue Act.
There you go.
Rescue Plan Act.
What's the P?
Rescue Plan.
There you go, okay. Second question is, where does it come from? Federal government? Yeah, well, so
They
somebody got in
printed.
front of a computer and they typed in a bunch of dots and dashes. And they added a lot to the national debt
Was
in
that,
doing that.
that was the COVID payments, wasn't it?
ARPA is tied to that, but it's under different guise of recovering the economy because they shut it down in doing that. So it's quite a large sum of dollars being offered to every state and locals in doing that.
So
And
the
then,
third part was, if we take it and use it, how is it gonna affect our state?
that's still a question in doing that.
And that concerns a lot of citizens of Idaho.
Yes, it does, yeah. And so as I get those questions, I try and get them answered in doing that. And I dug onto a lot of different things, and it's not quite as scary as it sounds, but there's still a lot of questions that I'm trying to figure out. That's my stance on that. I don't, how does it affect us? That's an ongoing question for me. I don't know, because I try to answer the questions as people bring them up, and there's other things that are being brought to me where different things outside of it are supposedly being tied into it, and that's what I need to determine at this point. I continually have people asking questions that I try and get answers to, that's all I can say. But what I've found so far, it doesn't look quite as scary as some people are thinking. And in talking to the US Treasury, looking at case law, standard Supreme Court case law, looking at other executive orders that claim federalism, looking at standard federal procedures that they can't impose things upon states without clearly defining what it is. So if you're worried about the what ifs, then we have plain legal standing to push back on that if we're taking dollars and they're saying, well, you didn't do this. But if it's something that you have to go hunt and pack and find and put these things together, that's not clear and explicit when somebody accepts those funds. And that's why at this point, I don't think there's a problem there, regardless of whether I think we should take it or not. But as far as some of those things, those are the questions that I've had answered in doing that. But there's still more investigation that I intend to do.
Can I comment on that real quick? As Commissioner Connolly knows, and as an S-Corp who pays a lot of money to the feds, I'm excited to see some of it come back to the state. If it's going to be going somewhere, let's at least get some use out of it. So I'm excited that what Senator Woodward was talking about is that we do see, because our infrastructure could use some help. And if somebody else from the feds want to pay for it, great.
Jeff?
One of the things that I don't think any of us like the Fed messing in what we do here in Idaho. We just assume they leave us alone. I mean, we're all in agreement there, but when you do pay a lot of taxes and you know you do watch it being thrown out the window at 100 miles an hour, I do feel like we should be doing something to at least benefit the citizens of Bonner County. And I think that there's a lot of things that we can do with ARPA money that will do that. You know, you can benefit your senior centers, you can benefit your food banks, you can benefit your mental health, suicide. You can do all kinds of good things with this money. And I'm confident that between all the different attorneys that have looked at this and all of them that have advised the commissioners, that we can spend this and not have to worry about it. And I plan on trying to do the right thing with that money. I mean, we can argue all day long about the debt, which none of us like. And if I was a decider on that, I'd say, yeah, let's just leave that 8.8 million that we're supposed to get, or we have got a portion of it, out, and I'd be fine with that as long as everybody else did that. But if we're the only ones going to do that, I'm thinking I want our fair share, and that's just the way I feel. I've got a question for you on the new tax bill. What I didn't hear, and I don't know if you know, is so as we're hit with this inflation that is out of control, how is that going to adjust? How do you adjust that formula to make sure that the counties that are dealing with, I'm going to say 16% inflation, if not more, between wages, fuel, and all the things, where does that come from? Or how are you gonna deal with that?
I didn't hear that addressed. That'll most likely come out in the full hearing, because that's a good question, because we don't want to start something and then leave holes that we have to backfill with other funds in doing that, because it would be very hard to then impose a property tax again if we took it back in and to leave the locals short. So we asked a lot of questions in a print hearing. Print hearings are normally quick, but that'll all come out, I'm sure.
Yeah, because I think one of the points is they're gonna repave the United States. Well, that's all fine and dandy, we'll just magically produce trillions of dollars to do it. Oh, and by the way, let's triple the cost of the main component, oil. So 16%.
Well, yeah, we're looking
at that already, yeah.
Brace yourself for 200%.
I'm looking at asphalt increases of 38% right now, is what we're hearing. We've just bid 2 projects, I'm really interested to see. But it's very likely that we're gonna get an extra $2.2 million from the state that'll be gobbled up by inflation. And we probably won't get any more done than we would have with the 1.2 million we already did. So it's like, oh.
So we'll come right to you. I just want to talk about to that just a little bit. So Commissioner Conley is referring a little bit to the price inflation. If you look at the consumer price index, we see inflation right now is about 7.5%. There are multiple inflation indices, and the producer price index, and there's even a local government cost index. And when I went and dug that up last year, it ties in with what he's saying. It's almost double the things that the local government is buying: oil, tires, trucks. Those prices are inflating at a much higher rate, so it's a challenge. So we're answering that question because we're talking about that potential tax change in Idaho, and I just want to share that I'm hesitant on that, or reserved on that right now, because the situation seems very analogous to 2006, that we're trying to deal with property tax, and property taxes are up because of the inflation, and because the economy is so strong, and residential values are up, and so.
Is that right? It's the village rate, not the price of the property.
That's right.
It's the assessed value, and what's happening is that not all properties going up at the same speed. So ag forest is staying down here flat, and commercial is staying fairly flat, and all residential is going just like this. So it isn't spread fairly, it's a tax shift. Is what happens is the tax shift comes to the burden of the homeowners.
That's my point, is that the situation we're in now is very analogous to 2006. We made a shift in 2006, it didn't work very well for us, because in 2008, we had a significant downturn in the economy, the Great Recession, and that really took the wind out of the sails on that plan, and it didn't work out. And so that's, the change in 2006 was 1% more on sales tax, but getting rid of the M&O line item. When you look at your property taxes, you can see the fire district, the hospital district, the library district, and of course, cities and counties. And this change does affect all of those. It makes all of those different districts more vulnerable to fluctuations in the economy. Because if the revenue's not coming in because sales tax is way down, because the economy is way down, then all of those districts won't be able to necessarily meet their financial obligations. That's my point, is that we'll be looking at that one hard.
Yeah, my question is for both of you, where do you stand on critical race here in our education system?
So what we did last year, this came up last year, is a question, what is the appropriate material? We want to be able to educate our young people, but we also don't intend to indoctrinate people. This is Idaho, we're all very conservative in our values here. Last year, there was a bill that was passed through the House and the Senate, signed by the governor, House Bill 377, and it dealt with critical race theory in schools in Idaho. In fact, some of that was already in policy. Don't support it. We're not indoctrinating our children. We're going to provide an education.
Well, I'll tell you what, I suspect that some of this ARCO funds has got strings on it involved with critical race theory.
It doesn't now. In doing that, your
You sure?
education funds coming in from the federal government might, there's requirements there, but the ARPA funds don't. It's pretty clear, there's a couple minimal executive orders and standard accounting practices are required to do in that with ARPA, but there's nothing like that.
Well, I don't want my grandkids to be,
Right, it is something we have to watch for, and we did pass legislation to protect against that in that sense, because it's pretty common throughout the state house, and most people don't want that being in our schools. Jody?
So I have a question. It's sideways. For both of you. Is this candidate for both of you for or against mask mandates, also for or against COVID vaccines being required for employment?
Well, I'm not for those, and we've had multiple pieces of legislation passed through the House to address that, and a lot of it's come through the committee that I chair in doing that, and I've encouraged people to. We did pass off the floor last week. It was pulled back to committee, I think. There was another prohibition on mask mandates, but there was some language issues. So before we voted on it, it got pulled back to committee, and it's probably going to come back just to clear things up, because one of the things that was said on the floor was it would prohibit you, or could, prohibit you from wearing a welding mask in shop class or something to that effect. It was a little too broad. And sometimes things are exaggerated on the floor, but nonetheless, that was pulled back. But we just Thursday, we passed another one dealing with employers not being able to require vaccines. They would have to ask that up front. If you're a new employee, here's what our policy is. If it's not explicitly stipulated in there, you could bring it in later to do that, to help with that issue in doing that. But there's 3 or 4 pieces of legislation coming through the House dealing with mandated vaccines and doing that. So that's something I'm against.
Yeah, Joey, yeah, I need to ask you the question here, so Joey's done it right there. The mask mandates, we've always said that, that those decisions are made locally, right? We're not doing a statewide mask mandate. The health districts, what we did last year, looking back at this, said if there's a health issue, then the health districts they set any requirements necessary to meet public safety. But we changed that in that the health district used to be that final say in a region. We have the Panhandle Health District here, who have 5 or 6 more health districts throughout the state. And we put that on to the locally elected officials. And so Commissioner Connolly and the other 2 commissioners now, if there's going to be any kind of decision maker, a public safety requirement, and it's going to be countywide or district-wide, then our local elected officials would be the final say on that. That's a system that was put in place after that. And the vaccine mandates as a condition of employment, certainly agree that changing conditions of employment require both parties to agree. Idaho is a right-to-work state. That means, and I think sometimes I feel that folks are drifting over the idea that they have a right to their job. I'm an employer, I have employees. The relationship between my employees and between me and one of those employees is between the 2 of us. I don't need any government interference in that. I have enough as is.
Exactly.
Look, can't the state shift the liability onto the employer? If the employer tells me I have to be vaccinated to work for them, and then I have complications from the vaccine, the person that produced it doesn't have any liability. The federal government's not taking any liability, and if the state could shift the liability onto the person that mandates that you get it at the level that you're told you have to have it as a liability, they probably won't tell you to get it.
Well, right, no, that's a valid argument. And the beauty of it is, if you don't agree with your employer, you don't like what they wear for clothes, you don't like their attitude, you can walk.
Well, I've always been self-employed, but I wouldn't have my children.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
but
have as
also,
many choices.
but also as a business
You
owner,
take care of yourself.
you take care of yourself, and as a business owner, and I've employed people in this state for almost 20 years. And one of the things I like about the state of Idaho is the state doesn't tell me very much about what I can do. And I don't like the idea of slippery slope of, okay, because masks and vaccines are contentious right now, they want to jump in and maybe mandate that we can't mandate. But I don't want to open the door of the state doing more regulations on business owners. And so I think it's a contentious issue now, but I don't like the idea outside of it of the state telling much about my relationship with my employees.
This is a standalone. This is an experimental drug that's had the liability removed from it from the producers. but the federal government's not taking any liability. And then they're mandating it on people. So this is a pretty
So
much a
we've had legislation to
standalone.
address the liability issue in the House. I don't know if it was part of the end of session last year when it didn't go anywhere, or it may be in the process right now.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
can
you
look that
can't
up.
compare this to
So that
anything.
approach was taken exactly for what you said in doing that.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a standalone issue. We're very reticent to enter that relationship. Many legislators are, most of us are in doing that. But when it's encroaching upon personal liberties and personal rights, you can walk, but if you're a medical person and you walk, you can't go to the next hospital because they've got the same thing and the same thing. So when we discuss free markets and the transition of people, it doesn't always work that way, and being able to go walk and find a new job. There's a reality there. So in protecting somebody's personal choices is critical. Sometimes we have to go in there. We do it in many different ways, and I don't like it either. But this one rises to a point where I think we might want to step in and do that. Whether it ends up that way in the legislation, I don't know, but I support those efforts in doing that. But I fully understand what you're saying. I was an employer before as well, and I agree with those principles. Very difficult to balance those at this point in time with this, kind of a one-off in doing that. I don't see it as a slippery slope, because that's why it's been slow moving in doing that, because we don't want to break that barrier.
But I
in
also
doing that.
think, like, the state needs to recognize that we as business owners are also doing what's best for not just us, but our employees as well. Like, my husband and I are vaccinated, but we're it. We didn't mandate it. We just said, you guys are on your own. And, you know, you have some sick time if you get sick. Hopefully you still have sick time. Didn't use it all in Hawaii. But I've always been, we never know where we are with our legislature right now. That in 10 years there's something else that comes up and it's like, well, you know, we stepped in then. I'm just on that line of,
I
I
understand.
believe in a
I'm
slippery
going to tell you,
slope.
most of us are there as well. This is just such a unique
It's a
instance.
standalone.
And trying to protect people from being forced to do something in order to keep working and providing for their family, to do something that is somewhat questionable in that sense, that it's unproven, and the whole situation is an odd one-off in doing that. But you're on safe ground with most of the House, and a lot of what you deal with in business comes through the committee that I'm chairman of. And I agree with you, and most of that committee agrees as well. There's a couple people on the left side of that committee that don't agree, but the other 15 of us do in doing that. So I think you're safe in our state for a long while.
Bill's what I want to ask a question.
Yeah, sorry. Going back to your property tax, that 1 acre, do they take in consideration, for instance, that 40-acre farm, or 5 acre, excuse me, I'm sorry, the 5 acre, because I've got 40 acres, obviously I have 39 agricultural, 1 home. So is that 1 home, is that how they're looking at it, or are they looking at it as the 40 acres?
They would look at the first 5, because that's what I was trying to drill down on. So the 5-year 40 would be exempted from taxes,
And then
and the other 35 would still be
could be an
taxed.
agricultural.
Right, and that's what I wasn't able to get there yet, but those are my questions. Is that going to be taxed just ag, and you have that level of taxation, or would that be considered residential and get a different? Those are all questions that'll come up
Okay.
when we get in there, but.
Sorry, I have 3, it's a 4-part question. So I was reading about this thing, and they said that the school levies are exempted from that. You would still be taxed school levy?
I'm sorry, I didn't say that. Any voter-approved bond or levy will remain on their tax roll. It's everything the senator mentioned as well. Counties, fire districts, libraries, all of that goes away.
Okay, so the other thing I read is they said that would make Idaho's sales tax the highest in the nation, but that is not true.
Correct.
Good, okay. And then lastly, this is for you, Senator Woodward. When you were talking about your averaging, property tax averaging, so in my case, I've been employed for 30 years, and my personal business cycle is I have 5 years of prosperity and 2 years of zero income. On average, that's what it's been doing for over the last 30 years. In those 0 years, or those years where I have zero income, and I can't necessarily plan forward because 100% of my good years are eaten up, the property tax is never taken into consideration for me that my income's zero. There's no circuit breaker whatsoever for that. Is there any way that averaging can take something and add that into the, if you've got a zero income, there's got to be a limit of how much of the income. Is there any consideration to that? Or could we add that?
I haven't thought that specifically. There isn't, right now, that proposal for 5-year averaging is on the shelf
Okay.
because of this other one. But that's something I'd mentioned because I think it helps, at least for majority. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, that being simple, and it's pretty effective. But it doesn't cover all situations. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a 5-year average, it could be 7, it could be something different, but it's one way that I know, just the math of it does solve a lot of the problems with the highs and lows of our current property tax system.
Okay.
But we're gonna take a hard look at this one this week. I've been involved, really it's the tax chairman, Senator Rice and Senator Harris. They've been working on it hard and had some folks around it, but I've been in those conversations just as Representative Dixon has, because we both know those folks well and we're involved in it and interested in it. So we'll see what we can do. I'm just not sure that with 3 weeks that we're gonna iron out all the details.
Thank you.
Happy to, and we spent a couple of years talking about different property tax ideas. And this one didn't ever surface. And I would have loved to have had 6 or 8 months or 10 months for everybody to get their ideas. And the counties are represented at the state level by an association of all the counties. The cities are represented at the state level. We have a lot of different organizations across the state. Unfortunately, the one organization that doesn't have direct representation, has not hired someone and come to Boise to represent their values, is the individual taxpayer, the individual property owner. That is our job. I guess we were hired. You're right. We're there. So,
Sure.
Yeah, I have a question about, I think it's House Bill 439, about the unaffiliated voters and the emergency clause. I'm getting a lot of questions on that, and there's a lot of confusion going on. Could you address that as far as whether or not these unaffiliated voters need to be affiliated by next week?
I think they do, the way that bill reads and what I've heard on it.
But it's not gone through the Senate yet, correct?
That's some of the difficulty with that, yeah. I don't think it's retroactive though, so.
Well, that's where the confusion's coming in. With the emergency clause, everybody thinks it's gonna be.
So the emergency clause is only when it's, well, shoot. No, it goes into effect when it's signed with an emergency clause, unless it's explicit in that language and it's reaching back. It shouldn't be able to reach back. I don't know that language, if it says that, and we can probably look it up really quick.
It does have an emergency clause in there.
Right, but that would mean that it goes into effect when the governor signs it,
Right,
unless it's reaching back. So if he doesn't sign it until,
March
who knows
12th.
when? Well, it depends, and I mean, he could sit there also.
Right.
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I know it's really specifically affecting the unaffiliated
Right.
voters. It's not affecting anybody.
Right, that's a lot of the concerns, especially people that are new to
Exactly.
Idaho and don't know maybe who they want to affiliate with. They've been
Exactly.
doing that, and they could be kept out of the voting cycle in doing that.
Well, that's where my questions are hitting me. You know.
Yeah, and I'm not aware,
They're not kept out of the voting cycle, they just can't vote for a party that's got
Okay.
those primaries. They can still vote for the Democrats all they want. But if the primary's closed, they have to affiliate.
But if
And
there's-
this changes it so that they all have to affiliate at the same time. Because right now, if you're a Democrat, you want to affiliate for the Republicans to vote in their primary, or vice versa. If you want to move around, and you have to change it by the 11th of March this year. If you're unaffiliated, you can wait till the polls, till the voting day, and affiliate that day and decide. This bill will put it so that the unaffiliated also have to make that choice by the same day the switch has to occur. That's what she's going for.
But that's not in effect yet.
I don't know where it is in the thing.
And as somebody who talks to a lot of people who are moving into town from out of state, because that's my clientele pretty much, they come in and they want to be, they're an independent or unaffiliated.
And if you're a new
But wait,
voter, if you're a new voter, it doesn't affect you.
But wait a second. They don't always understand until there's a cycle. So maybe they've been here for a couple of years and they want to hang on to that unaffiliated voter status. And I'm just telling you things that I hear from people.
Right, but I'm
and they
saying
think,
is, what it does is it makes them have to choose.
but they don't know they want to be able to understand who their candidates are before they
Sure.
choose.
The
And
point-
sometimes they might
I
not
think
know
it's
who the candidates
439.
are until they
But
see
you
their
know
partial
your
ballot.
value, you know your values, and if your value leans one direction or the other, you're not gonna wait till the last day to decide who you're gonna vote for, because you have a
But
value based on.
just because somebody puts an R&D on their name doesn't mean they have the same values as I do.
No, but most people know which direction that they float onto, and
No.
yeah, they do. I mean, I'm not gonna vote for a Democrat, I know what they stand for, and I don't stand for anything they stand for, so it's that kind of a thing. That's, all I'm saying is what the bill does is, if you are a Democrat and you wanna vote in a Republican primary to make a choice or to mess with it, I'm sorry, and you have to change your affiliation by a certain date.
But
Unaffiliated is gonna have to do that. She's just trying to make it fair for everybody, so if you make a choice, everybody has to make a choice at the same time. Unless you're a new registration and then you can still make your decision on voting day, or in early voting.
I can tell you that Mike Rosedale told me yesterday he has had no direction from Boise to change things. So currently, unaffiliated voters can affiliate on the day they vote, currently.
I would think it remains there until that is signed. I don't see it being signed before the 11th.
I just did look at that, it's worded different than I expected, because the legislation is written that it's in effect on the date of passage and approval. So when it's signed into law, it would go into effect.
Is it on your board at all, or does it still have to go through state affairs?
I think it's still in committee.
Okay,
Committee level.
okay. So maybe the good Senate will hold it. It's all the contention.
So there was a little bit of discussion last week about it, because you could go back and reword it and make it different for this year. But there was some discussion I heard about it. But people are acknowledging that today is March 8th, 5th.
Next Friday.
Maybe next Friday is the
And
11th.
by the time it got through committee and floor in the Senate, and then transmitted to the governor for signature,
It's going to be a week and a half.
yeah, definitely, people
If
are
it
realizing there's
withdraws
no
Monday.
problem there.
So, he kind of got mine, but I have two. So this bill, HB 741, is going to be voted on, right?
No, well, it needs to be voted on in committee first. So
Oh,
what
so-
happened yesterday was just the initial
So it might not even
presentation.
get out of committee.
It might not, and there's a lot of concern on the committee.
So
So
if
I'm telling this so I can get feedback
Yeah.
and ask the right questions, because I like it,
It
but I
doesn't
may
seem
not.
possible that at one point, what happens to the school levies, the pay for the fire department and all that?
So anything that is a voter-approved bond or levy remains on the tax roll. So that's school levies or capital improvement levies and things that some counties do, or cities, or I don't think our highway districts can do it. We talked about that, right?
So that,
At some point.
Any
But
bond.
anything that's voter approved will remain on the tax roll. Anything that is just a normal function of what the county gets to
so
facilitate
if
these
your
things.
school levy bill is $600, you still get that.
You would still pay $600.
Everybody gets that.
Yes.
Or whatever. So pretty much it doesn't change, because everything else is voted for, right? Like-
Oh, you would have a lot would come off your tax roll. You'd be paying probably less than a third
But
of what you pay now.
with the tax, raising it up to 1.85% cover that. I mean, people can really choose not to buy things very easily, or go buy
Don't say
them.
that in front of the commission.
Yes, that's my concern, is whatever you guys help her.
And we'll see this year, we're going to get those improvements at the south end of the Long Bridge, get some U-turn lanes so we can get off of, if you want to get on the highway from Lake Shore and go north, you'll just run south a little bit and then go north, and it'll be safe. And Bottle Bay will be able to utilize that same improvement, so that if you want to go south from Bottle Bay Road, you can go run up a little bit and do a U-turn and go south. And what happened out of that last year, when we went after those improvements on that Lake Shore, ITD stepped right up, acknowledged that we've got to start figuring out this corridor. And so with the money that came for the improvements we'll see this year, which also includes a traffic light at the Sagal intersection, with that money also came money for the initial studies, which is environmental impact studies and planning for that corridor. And so I think that ITD realizes that we've got to get started at this end where the traffic issues are. Once you're flowing, that can stay 2-lane, that whole area, Coquelin on south, that works well right now. And so it can stay 2-lane, but we need to jump to the north and work our way back.
Yes.
By the time we get back to where we tie in, we'll have enough people, that'll be a problem too.
Do you have another question? No.
It was just about the general election primary. That legislation I have read, but that only affects primaries, not general elections. Is that right?
Right.
Okay, so it's only primaries. So an unaffiliated person doesn't get to vote on a primary for the Republican Party. That's almost sounds fair to me.
Well, that's the point of it.
Oh, okay.
But it's still causing a lot of confusion and with a lot of new people coming in, so that's never,
But it does not affect the general elections. That's all I need now.
no, it does not.
Right, which kind of stops people from voting cross-party to keep someone from being a candidate.
There are
It's
two-
a game, it's gaming.
Yeah, there is that. There are two different pieces that I hear. Because, yeah, switching from party to party, that was set out and is in law now, you have to change by the 11th. I grew up here, right? Idaho, you pride yourself on being independent. A lot of people are tired of partisan politics, this is what I get. If you're tired of partisan politics, I don't necessarily need to have a brand stamped on me, but I want to be able to participate in saying who's going to represent me. And so there's a big block in the middle, about 30% of folks that say, don't put a brand on me, but I still want to participate. And that's a concern.
Especially in these local elections where a lot of times the only election is the primary. There's only candidates in the primary. So the independent voters feel very disenfranchised by the whole system that, won't allow them to, anyway, that's my point of view.
Well, and just take it where people aren't, filing for candidacy until, say, March 11th this year. And if you do want to do your research on somebody and check it out, you don't have a chance to say what you want to. And that's just, there's 30% of people that.
Probably had more than 30%.
Independent?
I thought that was the largest portion
I used to
of
say
our
that.
district.
I used to say 50, but I think I was kind of corrected a while ago. I think it's more.
I thought I saw it was more than 30.
Depends on what,
Old dog,
What's
I still
that?
want to keep.
5,400 in our two counties. That's a lot of voters.
One more?
Or is everybody ready to go clean up the yard?
Senator Bridget,
So they started to do something at Lake Shore, put some lines down, and
Right.
an up-to-speed lane and a big sign.
Right.
They're all gone now.
right, that was just the
You
first.
pull out there and think you're getting in a lane, good luck.
Oh, the lines are gone.
Oh, the lines are gone.
Oh.
It's
Yeah,
exactly the way.
That got to be a little bit late, we pushed hard enough, they were responding and they jumped in and tried to get
It worked really
some
good.
portion
It
done.
worked really good for the
That's
people that
good.
knew.
Yeah,
Now
As
it's
long
a
as you
mystery.
work behind the people that didn't.
but this summer, it'll get widened out.
They're gonna do the whole thing.
You need to
Median,
get your
stop
Texas
sign. I
insurance.
think that there's one little bit of right-of-way acquisition that might be slowing things down on the south end of it. So it might turn into almost all of it done this year, and then we still have to deal with the right-of-way acquisition on the whole piece of it.
we're trying to get a striping truck up here within the next few weeks.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect
Because
answer.
it is definitely
Dangerous.
problematic,
Yeah.
yes, I've heard.
Yeah.
We've heard. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you all coming out and
Yeah.
asking questions.